Hmm. Howdy, folks. Welcome. Hey, Bob. Hey, Ed.
Hi,
Court.
Elias.
Hi, Mary.
Hello, Elias.
Tim.
Oh, Elias, before I forget, could you send out the link to the bibliography again? I lost mine somehow.
All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Um, if you're wondering where herself is, Sam is struggling with a bad headache, migraine, and so she just asked if she could hand off today, which is fine. She's getting better, she said, but she just wants to make sure she doesn't set it off again. So um, we will miss her, but I'm sure she'll be back next time. Okay.
Let's hope it's not a cat allergy.
Oh yeah. Is that like I don't know about that. I mean, or not
No,
very much.
well, I know a friend of mine had cat allergy, which is like bad sinuses, but no, I was just being half facetious because she recently got the cat.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I have a mild cat allergy myself, so I don't know. Who knows? Um, okay, almost everybody in here. Great, great. Okay. Hi, Irene and Alex and Andrew. We've got three cantos on the menu today, and I will admit that Canto 15 is another one of my all-time favorites because, hi, Joanna. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Um, I was going to say Canto 15 has always been a kind of a favorite of mine because it's one of those great primordial themes. Hi, Daphne. The theme of the teacher, the magister. I bet if we did a little survey here and asked how many of you are in this reading group because at some point you had a really great teacher, I'm guessing it might be 100%, I don't know. But it's such a interesting sort of process, the way you have, yeah, so Katie agrees with that. The way in which people can kind of form your ideas at a certain point in your life. And then it's as though you go on through the rest of your life sorting that out, you know? And often, at least I'll speak to my own case, I come out in a different place in many ways from these early teachers, but they at least gave me this beginning, this framework, and then said, go wrestle with this. A good teacher, I think, would put it that way rather than saying, I've solved all the problems. So, but it's a complicated, and as Dante as Dante shows us, it's even emotional. It's something that goes very deep, and there is something to the idea that there's a touch of eros in this, not the kind of usual kind, but another kind of eros, which maybe we don't know very much about anymore. Um, but I think Dante touches on it in a kind of a powerful way when we get to 15. Okay. Looks like here's one more person. Great. All right. So welcome everybody. Hi, David. We're now on the fifth session. So we're about halfway through. We're going to be talking about suicide. We're going to be talking about the decline of culture. And then we're going to be talking about great teachers and their influence. Um, so what's going on, I think, in these middle cantos is there's a growing sense that's coming over Dante, the way he portrays himself, of not only a physical separation from his city, but he's beginning to reflect on its values and his own values thereby, and then whether there's some kind of a general decline in the world, which he wants to think about as well. So at this point, Canto 13, we're about to go into another dense forest. You remember we began with the dark forest in the very beginning. And this one is particularly creepy, eerie, full of harpies, which were awful hybrid creatures, and talking trees. So I'll read just a little bit to get us started here as he's describing this kind of anti-forest. And here's what I mean by that. The leaves not green, earth-hued, the boughs not smooth, knotted, and crooked forked, no fruit but poison thorns. Of the wild beasts near Cecina and Cornetto that hate fields worked by men with plow and harrow, none infest thickets that are as rough or as dense as this. He's referring to an area in Italy that was like the worst, scariest, darkest area, the Maremma, um, where none of the thickets are as bad as this. So he describes the harpies. He's pulling these out of classical mythology with their broad wings, the human neck and face, clawed feet. Um, and Virgil says to him as they're entering this scene, um, before you go farther, be aware that now you are in this, the second ring with the sin of violence. And so you shall be until the horrible sand, which is the next landscape. Look well, for here one sees things which in words would be incredible. You know, once in a while, Dante will say, I'm about to describe something which really words cannot handle. And then he describes it in words very brilliantly. But he makes this appeal sometimes, I think, to stir the reader's imagination to say, um, hang with me here because this is going to be hard for you to fathom. So he begins hearing these wailing voices, and yet he can't see anyone, which bewilders him. And there's this curious line. I'm not sure if anybody's quite figured this out. I'm looking at right around line 20 in the Pinsky. That's page 101. 22, actually. And so I stopped, bewildered. I believe my guide believed that in my belief, the voices I heard from somewhere in among the grove came from somehow from people who were in hiding places. This is a curious thing he does with the language. In Italian, it's credio che io credette che io credesse. It's like he's stumbling, he's stammering. In this canto, he is pretty appalled and sort of almost cannot speak in moments. He's so moved by what's going on here. And so we'll have to think about what that means. Yeah, Andrew, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that his it's not him, it's Virgil talking, which I think is interesting, right? When it
Right.
says that you can't you can't believe you can't put into words what you're about to see. Well, that's Virgil couldn't, but Dante can. That
Yeah,
point you were making just before.
yeah. I believe my guide believed that in my belief.
No,
Yeah.
even before that, what it says
Oh,
that the look well, for here one sees things which in words would
oh,
be
yes,
incredible.
right.
So
Yeah,
Virgil is like, so, but Dante can do it. Dante
yeah,
can take that
yeah.
next step because
That's right.
he's the next
Yep,
iteration of greatness.
yep, that's right. This next thing that's coming is a little weird. I'm just curious to know, is anybody referring to the Dore illustrations as they read? Yeah, Bob knows what I'm talking about. these are very powerful. And that they certainly accompany, if you know what I'm referring to, it's Gustave Doré was the 19th century French graphic artist. Truly yeah, that's the book, Bob. He did Don Quixote, he did the whole Bible, he did Ariosto, Rabelais, Paradise Lost, and maybe he's most famous for Dante. I would say that his imagination is very kind of gothic, so he's definitely at his best with the Inferno. Paradiso, you might imagine, is almost impossible to illustrate, really. But we're not relying on illustrations, we're relying on Dante's amazing language. But Doré is really quite incredible. And if you have not looked up his illustrations, um, particularly to the Inferno, but the Purgatorio is also wonderful. They give you kind of a feeling for the popular imagination here, the way people responded to Dante, particularly in the 19th century. And I think probably Doré is get some credit for making Dante even more popular in Europe, especially in the 19th century. So anyway, just an aside on that. So the scene I wanted to mention, let me see if I can pull it up here for you. Hang on one sec. Here we go. Yeah. So here's Dante reaching out and breaking off a twig, as Virgil recommends he do. And the master says, if you remove a little branch from any one of these pieces of foliage around us, the thoughts you have will also be broken off. Meaning, well, it'll settle your questions. So I reached my hand a little in front of me and twisted off one shoot of a mighty thorn bush, and it moaned. I wonder if anybody might be up for reading what follows after that from Why Do You Break Me? The 9 lines or so down through Release the Tip, and I stood like one in dread. Anybody
I'm
want to?
happy to read, but tell me where you're
Yeah,
starting. Oh, wait,
start with
Isabella's here.
start. This is on
Isabella's
103.
here.
My throat is
Yeah.
sore, so I'm not sure if I have it in me.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, I'll
Let's
do it.
see,
So say, tell
I can
me.
make an attempt, but I don't know if it would be
Well,
wise.
you'll have another chance in just a minute.
All right,
This is
tell me what line you want to start on.
32, which is Why Do You Break Me? And then ending, my hand released the tip and I stood like one in dread. About 9 lines.
Okay. Why do you break me? Then, after it had grown darker with blood, it began again and mourned, why have you torn me? Have you no pity then? Once we were men, now we're stumps of wood. Your hand should show some mercy, though we had been the souls of serpents. Okay, that's the end of
Keep
that
going.
quote. All right, you want to keep going? As flames
Yeah.
spurred at one side of a big log, oozing sap at the other end, hissing the escaping air, so that branch flowed with words and blood together, at which my hand released the tip, and I stood like one in dread.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Yeah. Very, very peculiar thing there. He is referring to a scene in the Aeneid. If you go back and look it up, a scene with Polydorus. Um, a modern reader, I'm just thinking, a talking tree, where have we seen this? We've seen it in a much more, sort of lovely sense in Tolkien. I was thinking of the Ents, if you remember that thing. Very different kind of tree. So, because these are, after all, examples of Dante's imagination trying to talk about what is some sort of final state for suicide. And again, I want to remind everybody there's no manual he's consulting here. Dante is just putting this together out of his own imagination. The term for this is a contrapasso. It's the corresponding punishment. If you kill yourself, what should be your corresponding punishment? And this is Dante's imagination, and also penances in the purgatory, where Dante just seemingly kind of out of whole cloth invents these punishments. So for the suicides, you lose your body. You make this decision to let go of your body, and you're put into the body of another thing, a tree. So, kind of a horrifying idea. So,
I
all
will
right.
say that this is so much better when you're looking at Dory.
I know. Yeah.
If these
Yeah.
books were, if we could get these books and have them include illustrations, oh my, that would be fabulous.
I think you can, I think you can download most of Dore's stuff
Yeah,
off the web. Um,
yeah.
Also, but just owning an oversized paperback copy is great, also. So, yeah, Andrew.
I find it interesting that Dore completely misses though the thorn aspect of it, which is quite quite powerful in my mind, and
Hmm.
I,
just an interesting.
yeah, isn't I think he's breaking the branch off, the thorn off
That
right
he's,
now.
I think
There's a
he's
difference
breaking the
between a
branch at
branch
that point. Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
thorn.
Yeah.
But
Jesus.
the anyway,
Okay, Andrew, got it, man.
And Dore is interpreting scenes that are kind of in motion. It's very difficult, I think, to even imagine, um, how you would depict this. So some things are obviously easier to depict than others, and
you know,
certainly
there
yeah,
was a TV show that's been on this winter on Apple. I forget the name of it now. It's a woman, maybe somebody can remember the name. It's this woman is the last person alive who hasn't been infected with a virus that makes everybody
Pluribus,
happy.
pluribus, pluribus.
hmm,
Pluribus, yeah. And in it, there's a character who has to struggle north, and he goes through a great wood. And in it, there are these intense, actually existing thorn trees
hmm,
that are so, I mean, they are the danger of his journey. And of course, he falls prey to them. But it's just interesting. The notion of a thorn is, to me, quite powerful. Whereas,
yeah,
you know, anyway,
yeah, would have
I'll
Christian overtones as
I'll
well. Yeah.
retreat here.
So
Yeah, there's
Dante
this
is
thing
going to
about a
meet.
crown of thorns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dante's going to
Yes,
meet
a
a
crown
figure
of
here,
thorns.
just very briefly, that in some ways I'm just thinking, um, has something in common with the figure we're going to meet in Canto 15, Brunetto Latini, his old teacher. And this is the figure of Piero delle Vigne, who was a suicide out of shame, but had this remarkable career, maybe one of the most notable people in Europe at one moment, because he was the counselor to Frederick II at the end of this peculiar experiment called the Holy Roman Empire. So I guess I should repeat the joke that it wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, and it wasn't really an empire. So anyway, but it was very
Wasn't
interesting
exactly an
nonetheless.
experiment either.
Right? Couldn't help myself. So this character Piero della Vigne was a very notable poet, jurist, politician. He conceived of the first state university in Europe, apparently, the University of Naples, which was a kind of school of diplomacy grounded in, of course, the theology of the time in natural law. And one commentator notes that there's an irony there because his suicide is, of course, in fact, a violation of natural law. So, but he also does something that a few other figures do, in hell and elsewhere. He asks Dante to restore his fame, his good name in the world. Um, the sin, commentators say, the sin of suicide is a kind of a false transcendence. It means we decide to play God and punish ourselves for the wrongs that we perceive in ourselves. In his case, his story is pretty horrendous. Whether justly or unjustly, he was convicted of treachery. He was blinded, publicly disgraced, and imprisoned. And I think Dante sees him in some ways because he worked for Frederick II as a kind of martyr for the imperial cause. The imperial cause in the kind of general sense of some secular ruler with the capacity and the genius to help organize society along with the papacy and correct this great imbalance that was going on in the world. So let me just read briefly from John Sinclair is the translator and commentator of the Oxford University edition of the Commedia. And he's talking about the scene with the suicides. It's a scene, he says, or a picture of the soul's abandonment to despair. The suicides have uprooted themselves from their bodies, and this unnatural separation, which in life is the work of a single moment of blind passion, and the wound which the suicide inflicts on himself, Dante renders eternal. The soul, violently separated from the body, remains enclosed in a body strange to it and of lower nature, in a plant that will feel every hour the violence which the soul wrought on himself in life. So, pretty dark. There are other suicides mentioned here. Lucretia from Roman history is actually in limbo. And then there's also the famous Elder Cato, who we will meet if we have this purgatorial class worked out, we'll meet in Canto 1 of the Purgatory. So he's not, neither Lucretia nor Cato are suffering this fate, which is sort of interesting. Anyway, Dante is just struck wordless with pity. And, tell me what you think. I think he was a counselor. He also was unjustly, he would surely say, accused. And he knew about the sin that Piero is describing here. The thing that pushed him out was envy or jealousy, this fear that people had of losing out. So that's a great tragedy. And Dante also asked Virgil for an explanation of the teaching on suicide. If any can be set free from this sin, which they cannot. And as they're in this conversation, suddenly two people go running through the scene. So rather than just finish this conversation, we're in hell. This is chaos. Things are always erupting. And in this case, curiously, it's two characters who run through the scene and they have deliberately, as the commentators say, they deliberately ruin themselves. They're spendthrifts. And this is, another curious notion to us, the idea that society would be so condemnatory of people who just chose to blow their own money. What's wrong with that? So they go through the scene and bring it to kind of a dark close. I should say one other quick thing about Piero. He begins speaking to Dante in this very kind of courtly tone. Your words have so much sweetness. They contrive to draw me out of silence. I'm enticed to talk a little while. May it not prove burdensome to you. I am he who possessed both keys to Frederick's heart, and I turned either, unlocking and locking with so soft a twist, I kept his secrets from almost any other. To this my glorious office, I stayed so true, I lost both sleep and life. So I think Dante is admiring of his eloquence. Brunetto, we'll see, is the same. He knows how to be a public man. He knows how to be a courtier and a diplomat. And he was an intimate of the emperor and had the power to persuade him either way, in a cause. But the vice of the courts, envy, as we can see anywhere we want to look, brought him down. So dying would be a way to escape disdain, the power of shame. This is certainly in many ways a shame culture. Okay, any thoughts on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I just was going to go back to that section which I thought was quite interesting of the Last Judgment. What happens to the suicides?
Yeah.
And guess it's in the Pinsky, it's at about um 90. Well, first that the suicide has
Hmm.
this creates this seed which inseminates the forest. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Where it says
Hmm.
to the seventh depth, it falls to this wooded place, no chosen spot, but where fortune flings it in. And there it sprouts like a grain of spelt to shoot up as a sapling, then a wild plant, and then the harpies feeding on the
Yeah.
foliage create pain. But then the next up on the next page at the top, this part where his cast off body, but not for us to dwell within again, for justice must forbid having what one has robbed oneself of. Still, here
Hmm.
we shall drag those bodies, and through the mournful wood, our bodies will be hung with
Yes.
every one fixed on the thorn bush of its wounding shade. So the final image here is like quite frightening. It's
Indeed.
these soulless bodies hanging from the thorn bushes, while inside the thorn bush is the soul
Yeah. Yeah.
trapped forever. I just think
Very
that
good.
was quite masterful
Yeah. Thanks
imagining.
for pointing that out. You're right. Yeah. Um, Once you cast off your fleshly garments, you cannot put them back on again, you know. And then going beyond that, so they hang in this horrific way on the trees. That is truly infernal. It does sound like something out of, the modern day concentration camps or the killing camps or something. Just you're skinned of your flesh, Awful.
Then
Yeah. Anybody else?
well, I just wanted to say one other thing,
Yeah.
which was that the very end is also, I think, kind of important where he goes to Florence. So he's left,
Yeah.
he goes back to his home as such in his mind, and
That's
he
right.
meets this anonymous suicide victim, and who asks him to sweep up the leaves and
Hmm.
to put them back near his bush. And then he has his, the art of Mars will always make Florence grieve, her grieve. And then, but then at the very end, he then tells us that he is a suicide, this voice, right? And I made my own house, my gallows. And you
Right.
kind of wonder, I guess I got somewhere I read that there was a lot of suicide in Florence at
Hmm.
this time. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's false. Maybe somebody else has run into that notion, but you
Yeah.
get the feeling
Mhm.
that it was something that was certainly around. If that's where he ends this section, he ends it back at home. He
Yeah.
ends it back in his city. That
Yeah.
that this anonymous person has killed themselves. Anyway,
Hmm. Yeah, that in the face of the perfectly well universally understood teaching that you cannot, should not take your own life, I mean, a suicide is a kind of a pagan gesture. And so, for example, Lucretia and Cato, maybe are understandable in one way because they were pagans that made this choice. But it's a very radical, extreme public statement you're making in this context. Yeah, very good. Thank you, Andrew. Any other thoughts on this one?
I mean, the only thing I'll say is I feel like this chapter definitely has like some empathy behind it, right? And it's interesting as you go through the various circles, right? Um, who Dante empathizes with and like their
Yeah,
suffering versus who he doesn't, right? Like we look at Argento a couple cantos ago, and he just eviscerates like, yeah, you deserve to be where you're at, like and then these folks he really has some pity for, um, and then
yes,
yeah,
that's right. He's very upset about this. Again, I can only think it's because his career, in some ways, resembled Piero's, and so in certain places, you can just feel he is empathizing while staying sort of within the system. you could almost imagine that this medieval theology is like a kind of a popular culture. It's just the way you would tell the story. You wouldn't know any other way, or not likely to know any other way to think about the afterworld, good, evil. This is sort of metaphorical in one way. But he really isn't about doing theology. He is about critiquing the church, but he is not really about challenging it in the sort of theological sense. Yeah, Jim?
Okay. I was looking at this and
What? I've got. Oh,
Did I miss
yeah.
no,
something?
I was looking at this and it's like, there's suicide and then there's taking your own life. And I'm thinking of like the
Hmm,
big issue that the early church had with martyrdom. It's like,
hmm.
except it's great when it happens to you, but don't go seeking it. I
Yeah.
mean, is there? I'm not detecting any type of nuance in his take on the suicides in this. Is that
Yeah.
a fair read?
Well, well, I mean, I'm not sure what the nuance would be. Tell me a little more about what you're thinking. Like, you mean the point you just made about martyrdom, for example?
Yeah, I mean, the early church
Yeah,
actually had to come out. I want to
that's
say it's
true.
Irenaeus. I want to say it's Irenaeus, but it may have been someone else who basically said, if you're facing martyrdom, great, accept it, but
Yeah,
don't go seeking it.
exactly. Right. I think that
Yeah,
was the understood teaching. Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Mary?
and
I'm sorry.
wondering if I'm just wondering if he's making that distinction in here, or is it just
That's a good question. I'm trying to think because I know he appreciates martyrdom and there are martyrs elsewhere in the poem. I'm trying to think of one offhand. So I know he gets that, but it doesn't really come up here. He doesn't seem to connect those two things here anyway, as far as I can tell. Yeah, Mary?
okay? Thank you.
How widespread was this available when it was actually written as a commentary on recent events or various individuals in Florence and all the
Yeah,
political turmoil that was going on?
yeah. Well, from what I understand, not long after the whole poem was published and was dead, over the next, I don't know, I think maybe 50 years or so, there were 800 copied manuscripts of the poem that were circulating around Italy. It was a breakaway bestseller among people who could afford to buy a big, expensive manuscript book. So, but then, it was passed around. Everything was passed around. The church also took a little while thinking about it and decided they didn't like Dante, not exactly because of the Commedia, but because of the Monarchia, which challenged the church's dominance. And so that got him on the index actually for a ridiculously long time. I think it was in the 19th century when they said, oh, yeah, we're not mad at you anymore. You did a lot for us, in fact. You've done a lot for us, strangely enough. So we'll take you off the index. Um, but it was very popular, and people certainly read it. They read it at every level. They read it at the pure grassroots political level and at the Starius theological level and everything in between, which of course is kind of what he wanted. But they also immediately had a million different ways of understanding it.
Mhm.
So there was no orthodox reading of the Commedia. Everybody had kind of a different take because that was really the power of the poetry. It was not a simple tale. Yeah. All right. Um, let's push on to 14, um, where we're going to talk about a different landscape. We're going to move into the violence against God, against nature, and against seemingly art and industry. Um, there's the scene here is a desert, just a little hard to imagine. It's a desert on which swollen flakes of flame are falling. And that apparently is Dante trying to mimic the landscape of the biblical scene of Sodom, Sodom and Gomorrah. There are three groups here. The blasphemers are the smallest group. They're lying supine, face up to heaven as the flakes fall down on them. The usurers, and we're going to come back to them, are bent over like money counters. And then finally, the sodomites, the term that the commentators use from theology, are the most numerous, and they are continuously running. So we don't really meet any living figure in this particular canto. We have this ancient mythological figure, Capaneus, who seems to hold God in contempt. And so he has a little speech. Um, and so Dante is kind of laying the groundwork here for this upcoming scene with Brunetto. But we are not very clear exactly on, again, the logic of the contrapasso, of the punishment that's being put in. I just want to say, Johanna, I know you're here too. You're a Dante teacher. I hope you'll jump in and straighten me out at any moment when I need straightening out.
Thank you. And at this moment, I am listening to you. I came to this group, as I mentioned in the beginning, as a reader, taking a different
Yeah,
position because
yeah.
teaching it and then reading it
Hmm, hmm,
and participating. But yeah, I mean, certainly this contrapasso, I I would suggest can be a little troublesome here because how does one decide upon this or evaluate this? What is
hmm.
appropriate for that? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Hey, Joanna, can I ask you something? Which translation do you guys use?
I use Ciardi.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
use the Ciardi. I like
I
the
have now have
language.
6 translations.
Yes,
And
yeah,
you know what?
Pretty good.
Our friend Mazada, those guys
Yep.
read prose. They read a prose translation.
Yes.
yeah. I prefer the poetry just
Yeah.
because the language is for me a little bit more
Sure.
rich, and just
Yeah.
I think it sets the story within the poem to
Hmm.
I think a much more exciting level than just reading the prose. So, and
Yeah.
besides which, I like to talk about poetry anyway, and that's part of the discussion
Indeed.
that we have in class. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that in just a moment. As a matter of fact, when we get to Brunetto Latini. Yeah, Andrew?
I would wonder if that Capanius, the guy who is the
Sure.
blasphemer here, and
Yeah.
his punishment is to be supine, kind of makes sense to me in that he's on his back and the only thing he can really see is up above him, which is
Hmm.
typical human source of God, or in his case, it would
Hmm.
have to be all the ancient gods, the many gods of his culture, because he's not a Christian. And so,
Hmm.
and it's Jove who rains down, thunder and lightning on people. So that's to me that makes sense that the blasphemers are on their back, looking up
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
heavens and cursing them,
Yeah.
for all time.
No, right. And there's an amazing amount of ink that has been spilled trying to figure out how to understand these punishments. Obviously it's not a simple thing to do, and it seems very metaphorical, very poetic. It's fascinating, but it's not anything very obvious or logical. It's not tied to any treatise or manual of theology anywhere. It's Dante being Dante. So I want to
So
go
when
down a
they're
little
looking,
bit. Yeah,
could I just say one?
please.
This
Yeah,
is a
please.
question I have too. When they're looking up, though, they're looking at the circles that come above, that rise above them. So, are they actually seeing God? Are
Good
they seeing
question.
the
Yeah.
heavens? So it's
Well,
No,
kind
that
right.
of, yeah,
that might be the irony of it. That's why they're in
Exactly.
hell, right? Is
yeah.
that
That's right.
their words are empty. They have
It's
no force. They have no
it's
they can
yes,
influence no one, but they are
Yeah.
eternally damned to blaspheme. And
that's right.
I don't know, as if they were on earth.
Yeah. So, and similarly with Piero's request that Dante report his fame back in the living world, there's nothing that's going to improve Piero's fame, back in the living world. It's just his emotion of remembering his life when that question was literally life or death to him. So anyway, I want to see if I could go to lines 77 here. This is an image that I have always been very struck with. It just seems like it kind of comes out. The Old Man of Crete, which is this bizarre, colossal statue in this mythical kingdom. It's kind of like something out of Atlantis. And I thought maybe somebody could read Pinsky, it's 115, and starting at line 77, in the middle of the sea, going down to line 93. On it, more weight than on the left is pressed. Anybody like to read?
Sure, I can take it.
Yeah, David.
Um, I'm sorry, you said 77?
In the middle of the sea and thereafter.
Yep, perfect. Um, in the middle of the sea lies a wasteland called Crete, a realm whose lord governed the world in its age of purity. The mountain Ida is there, which once was glad with foliage and waters, and now must lie deserted, like some worn thing by time decayed. Long ago, Rhea chose it for her child as his safe cradle, and since they had to hide, made all their shout whenever her infant wailed. Within the mountains stands an immense old man who turns his back towards uh, Damietta to hold his
Hmm.
gaze on Rome as on his mirror. Of fine gold is his head, pure silver his arms and breast, down to the fork is brass, and from there down the choicest iron comprises all the rest but the right foot, of clay baked hard as brick. On it more weight than on the left is pressed.
Yeah. So Dante has figured out a way to represent, or maybe he picked it, he didn't have to figure it out, kind of his view of history. Um, and this was an old classical trope. I think you can go back to Hesiod and the decline of the ages. There was an age of gold, followed by an age of silver, followed by an age of iron, and so on. So this is just kind of a perennial cultural myth. And so a symbol of human history and decadence. You can find it, decadence in the literal sense, falling down, falling lower, based on the book of Daniel, second book of Daniel. And then I think there are a few features from Ovid, but it's a physical image for Dante's sense of the world running down. You notice that the statue faces away from Egypt, the east, and toward Rome, which Dante believes is the proper direction of history. Not so much Rome as the papacy, obviously, but more like Rome as the imperial vision, the Pax Romana, that period of time when history seemed to be relatively stable and harmonious. So you could certainly have a big discussion about how historically informed Dante's idea of Republican and imperial Rome were, but they are his image of a time when things seem to be in order, and this providential connection of Rome's culture with the gospel created the new thing that needs to be put back together now that it has broken apart. In fact, what he's saying is that the iron legs are church and empire. This is the way the commentators understand it. And the foot of clay is the existing and degenerate papacy. So that's his way of kind of giving us an image of where the world is at this terrible moment. Then he goes on, and I'll just kind of finish up the image. Every part but the gold head bears a crack. a fissure, dripping tears that collect and force their passage down the cavern from rock to rock into this valley's depth, where as a source they form the Acheron, Styx, and the Phlegethon. Then their way down is by this narrow course until, where all descending has been done, they form Cocytus. And about that pool I will say nothing, for you will see it soon. So I think I mentioned before this incredible idea that the rivers of hell are human tears and blood. And here is this statue, this representation, kind of a allegorical, well, quite allegorical notion of how to explain that. But it's an amazing stroke of imagination. Any thoughts on that, Andrew?
I did have a thought. I was thinking that this canto was sort of similar to that 111 in that
Yes.
it's Virgil's opportunity to kind
Yep.
of once again school
Yep.
to teach Dante about some aspect of the human condition which goes beyond the Christian world.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we have this blasphemer from the past, and then this fall of humans, but not the Garden of Eden. Instead, this old man of Crete,
Yeah.
and going from a time of great perfection to the the rot of the papacy, as you just said. So I
Hmm.
just think that that's an interesting, like kind of interlude before we get on to this next, the 15, which is so beautiful and so personal to Dante in a
Yes.
way that the suicide canto was personal to him and local to
Yeah.
him.
That's right. Let's see. I see someone else has raised their hand. I can't see. Oh, David. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi there. I was just thinking about it just now as we are talking about, the head being the gold head being the one thing that doesn't have a crack, right? The fissure
Hmm.
goes down the rest of the body, and it makes me wonder, hell is supposed to be eternal, right? So does this mean that during Roman times, essentially hell had some dry riverbeds in it because of, the lack of tears flowing um, from humanity down into hell? I don't know if maybe I'm just taking the poetic language too literally, going
Yep.
that direction, but just something I popped in my head just now.
Well, I guess I would say maybe Court will have a thought on this too. The doctrine of hell, this Christian teaching, and all of that did not emerge until really past the time of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
So during Roman times, there were notions of hell, but not as a matter of Christian theology, simply because Christian theology was not even articulated yet. It really came together, after the time of Constantine and the time that he made the church the official religion of the Roman Empire. It's in the fourth century. The next 3 centuries, they're still thrashing out. So what is the Trinity again? And all of that. Court.
Oh, I was just going to say that in college, I think partly inspired by this poem, I was in a punk band called the Sodomites, just for a brief period of time.
I'm so glad you're in this class.
Yeah,
Go ahead. And
that's
is
it.
there more to
That's all.
say? Are you,
Yep.
okay. And the titles of your biggest hit. What was the title of your biggest hit?
It was something about throbbing gristle, actually.
Oh, excellent. Okay, that's nice. All right. Very good. Daphne.
I just wonder, in the time that actually Dante was being read, probably after his death, but
Yeah.
why would the blasphemer of a non-Christian of pagans
Hmm.
um, be even considered a blasphemer in the
Yep.
theology of Dante or of his peers? I
Hmm.
mean, who cares? I mean, they were pagan believers anyway, right?
Right. Yeah. Um, this is kind of a recurring kind of question in Dante because he does have this really strange way of blurring the lines between these Christian and pagan figures. It's part of the, wonderful kind of puzzle about Dante. Maybe one of the most famous, I just mentioned Cato. The elder Cato was a Roman statesman who was so appalled at the decline of the Republic that he felt the only way he could make a statement that showed his dismay at the corruption of the Republic was to commit suicide, which, was one way of, not a necessarily an unusual way of making a statement in a way about your life in antiquity. Dante puts him in purgatory. He's like one of the first uh, characters he encounters, which seems like there's no explanation exactly for how he won that job, but he's there. And it's another example of why, in the end, Dante is a poet. He's not a theologian, and he's not neat and precise and accurate about these kinds of things. There's a lot of interpretation and feeling and personality. And I think the way he makes these choices, sometimes we can explain them to a degree. I think Campaneus is just an example of rebellion against divinity in some kind of generic way. But it's hard to figure out, what else you could say about it. Yeah, Andrew?
I wonder if there isn't something to the fact that Virgil is the guide here, and Virgil has taken us to the underworld
Yes.
in his Aeneid. And so the underworld is an accepted kind of notion. There may have not have been a hell as
Yeah.
such, but the notion that there is some place where the dead might be able to be visited. And so Dante is using that older notion as a kind of the architecture of his vision of hell.
Yeah.
That because we saw that in that's what I was trying to say with Canto 11, where he uses
Hmm.
Aristotle's ethics
Yep.
and physics
Definitely.
to build an architecture of punishment. And again, going back to the ancients as opposed, or the
Yep.
pagans, as opposed to using a strictly, Christian doctrine that would paint the picture. So I
That's right.
think that, and it becomes then a sort of a commentary on what it is to be human, and even this old man who's, what is he delivering? The old man, he's delivering human tears to hell that will be mixed
Yeah.
with blood to
Yeah.
punish us, and it's to punish all of humans. It's not just Christians as such. And so,
Hmm.
the human condition is being represented, I guess,
Yes.
in this way.
That's right. I'll just drop in here about the condition of the church. And I don't know many people are aware of this history, or even this interpretation, maybe be a better way to put it. I want to mention the notion of, it's called in Latin, corruptio optimi pessima. The corruption of the best is the worst. So this phrase was taken up by the social critic Ivan Illich. I'm sure some of you know of Ivan
Oh,
Illich. You
yeah.
probably read his books on schooling or medicine. Toward the end
Hmm.
of his life, he was interviewed by his biographer, David Cayley, for a book called Rivers North of the Future. And in it, Cayley gives his theory of Christianity. I'm going to do a very crudely simplified job of this, but what he is saying is that about a century before Dante, the church went further in its progression of taking the gospel and turning it into an institution or institutions. So while on the one hand, you can go back to the theory that the medieval church is, the roots, the origins of schools, hospitals, charities, all sorts of things. They're also the origins of something else. And Ivan Illich, in this theory about the church's corruption, is saying by somewhere around the 12th century, the church is codifying things like marriage and other sacraments. And it moves further than just saying you must do these things. You must go to confession once a year. the church, because of its powerful influence on medieval society, begins to think about and talk about how these are not only sins, but crimes. So this is an ominous note. This is not the way we used to think about things. But power, the papacy, after all, had an army at this time, you know, not necessarily a huge one, a dominant one, but just one more army across a landscape where there were, I guess there might have been dozens. But Dante is in the
They also
mix
had a
of
bank.
this. Beg pardon?
They also had a bank.
Oh yeah, yeah. So and still got one. So
Yeah.
so Dante's in the mix of this development where the church is becoming something very dark. I mean, you look at this and you say, well, I understand the Reformation better now, you know. Look at what's going on here. This is, you know, this is awful. So Dante is not really getting deeply involved here in those controversies, but it is true that in the background is his notion that the best is being corrupted. And according to Ivan Illich, anyway, there's a time in medieval history where we can begin to see this, and it continued, and that many of our modern institutions, and this is where Illich is going, are in essence corruptions of Christianity at the institutional level, which is a pretty interesting notion. Johanna?
Yeah, it reminded me of because I study the medieval mystics as part of my teaching in
Ah,
medieval
great.
literature even. And so I was thinking about Hildegard von Bingen. She was um, excommunicated from the church because she did a simple
Huh.
thing. She buried a person in sacred ground. And you know, this
Um,
codification, legalization of certain things that seem to be more moral and ethical, of
mhm,
course, you know, this is. I think that Dante's aware of this. I mean, he wouldn't have been
mhm.
necessarily aware of her, but certainly, you know, that is something to be visited because it meant, you know, it meant suffering for so many
Yeah.
people because the thing that we naturally do as moral human beings, and you use that word human and others too, that's a problem with the church. And she was not given she was not given communion for a year. She received it just before she died. But the idea was that she stood up to the bishops. She wrote letters to the
Yeah.
Pope.
Yeah.
She did what any moral person would do, and that's
Yes.
to pay homage to a body, you know,
Yep.
a dead body. And he was also a soldier, by the way, the person that she buries. He was in the Crusades. That's the other part of that. The army, yeah, they were the Crusades, of course.
Huh. Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that I find this as a kind of reading it as a kind of commentary by Dante on the corruption of the church and that they're involved in things that they shouldn't be. Here we have
Exactly.
this mixing of church and state, and
Yep.
this is
Yep.
yeah.
That's
So
great. Thank you for that.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, Court.
I was just going to emphasize the notion of poetry and also pick up on our conversation from last time in the sense of times out of joint. Um, uh, uh, Dante was not a systematic. The church it
Right.
was not a he was not trying to write a systematic theology. The church had been doing all of this ordering and institutionalizing since Nicaea, and he's saying, look, there's all this other stuff we can be looking at. It's all
Yep.
literally it's the human comedy, right? And it, it opens up possibility, I think, um, for 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 uh, all kinds of things. And I think you could even draw a straight line through Renaissance humanism and the Reformation as an inspiration.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. Anybody else? Daphne is asking who's the woman. It's Hildegard of Bingen. I think it's
Fun
Bing.
Bingham.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There we
Fun
go. Yep.
Bingham. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right. Let's move over into 15. Speaking of poetry, because I shared, I don't know if you've spotted it. I sent out a copy of a translation of 15 by the American poet Robert Lowell. Yeah, Bob, you like that? Lowell
I
is a
like it too.
great figure.
Love
Um,
it.
yeah,
I didn't actually understand what the sodomite thing was until I read Lowell. Went,
yeah,
oh, I get it. Oh, yeah,
he,
yeah. Because
yeah, he
the reference to it is very sort of subtle in the tech in the
oblique. Yes, that's right.
yeah.
You're absolutely right. So we're going to get into that. We're kind of moving to kind of a night world here. Um, I mentioned the theme. The theme is the power of the great teacher in your life. And there are a lot of things that we don't understand very well here about Brunetto and his punishment. And again, if you dig very far into Dante, for example, with Paolo and Francesca, he's not exactly telling the stories that happened. He's giving it his spin. It's kind of like what they do in Hollywood. They may rewrite the book in all kinds of odd ways you didn't expect for who knows why. So this is somewhat true with Brunetto. He did not literally study at the feet of Brunetto, but he certainly knew his book. He may have known him personally around Florence, and may have interacted with him. But it wasn't kind of like technically a teacher-student kind of scenario, which doesn't really matter because the way Dante writes it, it certainly comes off that way. But it is strange that these spirits, these sodomites, as apparently they are, and they're called, are running. Their punishment is to be constantly kind of running. So you can imagine there's a lot of commentary trying to figure out what exactly is that saying. Um, I want to go to Pinsky, and I want to have somebody read the Pinsky for us starting on page 119. And just this opening simile, where this is very famous, of course, because of Dante's skill on lines 12 through 26. And I could not have seen the wood down through Are You Here, Sir Brunetto? Anybody want to volunteer?
I have it on good authority that Melissa is a terrific reader.
I'll take it from you.
Come on,
Don't,
Melissa.
don't be shy. You know,
Step up.
it's fun. Sure. So
And I could,
middle of
and I
page
could not,
119, and
yep.
I could
Uh,
not have seen,
And where would you
okay,
like me to go to, hon?
and down through Are You Here, Sir Brunetto?
And I could not have seen the wood that lay behind us had I looked back, when we encountered another troop of souls who looked at us the way that men will look at one another at dusk, when daylight fails under a new moon, knitting their brows at us the way old tailors do when threading needles. While I was being examined by them thus, one recognized me and took me by the hem, crying, "Why, what a marvel!" I fixed my eyes on his scorched face as he reached out his arm, and the baked features I saw did not forestall my knowing him. I reached back down to him, my hand toward his face, and answered his call. "Are you here, Sir Brunetto?"
Yeah. So what is going on here? He he clearly is struck to find his old teacher here. You notice that Dante is above on the walkway. Brunetto is below him. He has to lean down, kind of reversing the teacher-student, sort of image in a certain way. And um, this figure, by the way, Brunetto is an elder statesman. He was a poet, a man of action. He influenced not only Dante, but a whole generation of young Florentines. He's about a half a century older than Dante, a figure of this wiser, older generation. He was a translator of Cicero. He was probably the person who inspired Dante to go into public life. Dante was 29 when Brunetto died. So the student, recognizing his old teacher, even under these conditions, he wants to sit down and talk with him, just like in the old days. And Brunetto has to tell him he can't stop and speak, or his punishment will be increased by 100 years. But clearly, Dante's reverence for Brunetto comes out in one way. And the difference, as the commentators note, is that Dante is speaking for one value system and his teacher is speaking for the older one he no longer subscribes to. Dante is speaking as a Christian, and Brunetto is speaking as kind of a Ciceronian, you could say, which is still something Dante is very emotionally attached to. So a little bit like I was saying at the beginning, I think maybe some of you weren't quite in yet, that when you have a great teacher as a young person, you spend the rest of your life sorting out, do I still agree? Or was he right about everything or she right about everything? And what do I think now? And so on. So it's a bit like that with Brunetto. There's still a very strong emotional bond, and it goes beyond just sort of intellectual agreement or disagreement. Um, I thought by contrast, I shared the Lowell with you. I want to read the same lines from Lowell um, as we just heard from Alyssa from the Pinsky. And you're going to notice the difference here. One of them is that Lowell is not too worried about getting everything in. So he's a poet, and poets are total libertarians. Poets will do an imitation of another poet, which can be amazing. Lowell wrote a book called Imitations, just this way. So these are not translations; these are new poems. And so this is from his book called Near the Ocean. And you'll notice he has a rhyme scheme, and it's roughly ABA, CDC, EFE, and so on. So it's not terza rima, it's not Dante's rhyme scheme, but still it gives it a certain music. So here are the same lines from Robert Lowell. We met a company of spirits here, trooping below us on the sand. Each one stared closely at our faces, as men peer at one another under the new moon, or an old tailor squints into his needle. These puckered up their brows and glowered. Soon I saw a man whose eyes devoured me, saying, "This is a miracle." He seized my sleeve, and as I felt his touch, I fixed my eyes with such intensity on his crusted face that its disfigurement could not prevent my recognizing who he was. "Oh, oh," I answered, groaning, as I stretched my hand to touch his arm. "Are you here, Sir Brunetto?" So Lowell is great at this. He, was a poet of the 60s, very history-minded, someone that had all kinds of personal woes, including mental illnesses and so on. Um, as I'll try to make this a quick comic aside. I met Robert Lowell a long time ago as a young guy. I was at UT Austin, about 19 years old, and the English department brought Robert Lowell to campus to speak. This is in the middle of the Vietnam War. Lowell will soon go to the Pentagon with Norman Mailer and Dr. Spock, not Mr. Spock, and protest and be written up in a book called Armies of the Night by Norman Mailer, classic book of the Vietnam era. Anyway, a bit before that, I wangle myself a seat at lunch with Robert Lowell and about a dozen other teachers and students. And I am just the rawest person in the room. I barely know anything about literature yet or poetry. I sort of know who Lowell is. I kind of know the circle he's in, but I'm raw. And so my memory is that in the middle of the lunch, I finally saw an opening and I said to him, "Mr. Lowell, is it true that you once wrote a letter to FDR writing as a Boston Lowell to a Hudson Valley Roosevelt?" This is when Lowell was a conscientious objector in World War II. And this incredibly idiotic question was met with a look of complete pained incomprehension because it did not deserve a reply. But anyway, that was my first foray of making contact with the great, and it failed spectacularly. So I just had to share that. Any quick thoughts before we go?
To say that Robert Lowell is also the father of confessionalist poetry. So I think that piece that you
Thank
read,
you.
uh, kind of leads us
Yeah,
into some interesting conversation about
great
the
point.
sodomites.
Great point. Aha. Yeah. Yeah. And you notice he does use the phrase, I think I put this in the note. He uses the term lusts as opposed to Pinsky's more neutral, what does Pinsky say? Passions or something?
Not
Uh,
even, not even
yeah.
passion.
Yeah, he flattens it a little bit. Well, the reason for this is, and you can imagine the amount of commentary spilled on this, it isn't definitive that Brunetto was a homosexual. So in in these poems, these rather these cantos, this one and the next one, there are 7 or 8 people that are mentioned, and 7 out of 8, I want to say, don't seem to have any reputation of this kind. So it's not ironclad that that was the story with Brunetto. It seems likely, but it's again, it's not sort of ironclad. Um, and the other question is, I noticed the commentator here, I think it's Penske's daughter, believes that Dante is outing Brunetto. Well, there's also the theory that there's nothing to out here. He was well known to have this proclivity. So it isn't that isn't really what's going on, or it doesn't seem likely that that's what's going on. But again, we're in the realm of speculation, as we often are with Dante. Ara?
Yeah, I guess I just want to raise, the potentially ignorant question of just like, why does it even matter? Like,
Yeah,
who cares? I mean,
yeah,
I just I'm always taken by this like obsession to like know, is it like exact, is he like a, does he a top, is he a bottom,
sure,
does he like fist? It's like, who the fuck
sure.
cares? Like that's like,
Yeah,
is that really what this poem is about? I mean, why don't we, why aren't we just concerned with the kind of larger atmosphere, the feeling, like understanding, like the
yeah,
torment of seeing somebody that he has respect in this circle, not understanding why he got there, how he got there, necessarily being immersed in a landscape where there are so many of these figures.
yes,
So like to nitpick like exactly the particular ways in which, or transgressions, I mean, just seems, I mean, other than the categories, of course, are important. That's how the poem is structured. But
yeah.
I always just come back to this. It just seems like we're not,
This is a
it's
great
looking
question.
for,
I
yeah,
don't think
anyway.
he is, but I don't think Dante is nitpicking that. I think there's a sadness here at the beginning. And
Yeah,
I found this section um that was read earlier, where we first encounter the Sodomites, quite very sad. It reminded me actually of Alan Turing and
yeah,
and our laws, in the 1960s and 50s and 40s and 30s and 20s against
yeah,
homosexuality. But
yeah,
at one another, we encountered another troop of souls who looked at us the way that men will look at one another at dusk when daylight falls under a new moon, knitting up their brows at us the way old
mm,
tailors do with threading. There's a sadness there. That's not a
yes,
that's not
yes,
a and he sort of drops it as well. He doesn't really go on with the sodomites, and I think the word Lowell's
yeah.
use of the word lust is completely inappropriate. Actually, it doesn't
It's an
really.
interpretation.
That's what doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah,
Lust,
yeah,
in the same way that Lowell uses, where does he say, him whose eyes devoured me, as if he was this older
right,
man. I mean, I've had
right,
eyes
right.
devour me many a
Loading, he's
time in
loading
my
the
youth,
language a bit.
and
Yeah,
I wasn't. That's not what's happening in this poem.
okay.
That's Lowell's life, which is fine.
Uh,
You say he's a confessional poet, so um,
yeah.
I
Arthur, do
just
you
think
have
the
something?
whole sodomite issue really drops out, and it becomes more about this teaching and learning and
Yeah, I
literary
want to come back to
fame.
that.
So anyway, okay, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I just want to be clear that I absolutely do not think Dante is doing this. My contention is that why should we be worried about this, or why
exactly.
would,
Right.
scholars, or
Yeah,
why would
yeah,
commentators? I mean, you can have so
That's a
many
great
of these
point.
conversations that digress into these, was he this, was he exactly that? And
So,
I think
totally.
absolutely, I think it's much more, just to get to the
Yeah,
feeling of
we're
confusion or sadness or
we're not
whatever
going
it
we're
is.
not going to psychoanalyze these characters. Right. Melissa?
I I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Mary Jo Bang is also a poet, and since you
Yes.
gave us
Yes.
this comparison, I thought those of us that are just interested in the language and the tradition of the poem,
Right.
if you would indulge me for 2 seconds, that same passage by Mary Jo Bang, and if you're not
Oh,
familiar with
wow.
her,
Okay. Yeah, this is going to
she's
be
a
interesting. All right.
yeah, she's the for those who may not know her, I'm introducing her work as she won the National Book Prize for her work of poetry called Elegy. So this is a
Mhm.
much more colloquial.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yes.
let's see. It was when the thicket was already so far off and obscured by the mist, if I turned back to look, I wouldn't have seen it, that we came to a group of souls running parallel to the bank, and they stared up at us like men will sometimes give one another the eye at dusk in the dim white of a fingernail moon, brows knitted and eyes squinting, like an aged tailor threading the eye of a needle. Studying us like that, one recognized me. He reached up, grabbed the hem of my coat, and cried, "This is amazing." As he stretched his arm out to me, I searched the scorched face. Behind the burnt features, I could see a man I'd once known. Lowering my hand as if to touch his face, I asked, "Senor Brunetto, are you down there?" I mean, to me, that lacks some of it has the urgency and immediacy of language that
Yes.
maybe more readers could comprehend, but it lacks
Yes.
the nuances of this
Yeah.
this relationship that we're
Well
all
said.
picking up on. So isn't that
Well
interesting?
said.
I thought others might find that
Yeah,
interesting. The
she
answer.
is really interesting. I'm a little wary of her because she wants to be so colloquial that, people like Elvis turn up in her translations, things like that. She's kind of pop. But, that was lovely. That was a good section that you just pulled out. Yeah, Aaron? No, you're good. Okay. I want to pick up on Aaron's point to say that yes, modern commentators have modern preoccupations. And so, one of the things about living in the universe of the virtues, a character-based society, a moral system based on Aristotle, is that to us it seems very external. It seems there is no sense, no deep sense that people have of psychology, obviously, because that would be an anachronism. Freud is centuries away, Rousseau is centuries away. Who you are, Piero, Brunetto, Dante himself, is the sum of pretty much your actions, your roles in the world. And so one of the advantages of this that we learn about if we read people like many of you will know Alistair MacIntyre in his book After Virtue, is that, in a funny way, in the medieval scene, it is possible to say what a good man or a good woman was or is. There's a fairly shared understanding of what moral character is. There is no delving into the psyche, not anything like the way we do. The way in which a commentator would try to figure out, is Dante really attacking Brunetto for his gayness, and trying to peel all that back. It's just not, often it's just not there. The same thing with Francesca, by the way, or any other figure you might think of. But this was a different value system based, as I say, mostly on acts, not on thoughts and emotions. The church says, and including in those acts are things like processes of prayer, uh, confession, forgiveness. They're all kind of, in a way, they're all kind of outer directed because you had to do this, with a priest or, in a church service, whatever. So this makes for, in a way, a clearer accounting of your own life and a greater kind of concord. So that is a way in which Dante's world is very different. It's kind of fascinating, and it was part of a very big moral system coming out of Aristotle, which influenced Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all three for a millennium. And so the point of the book I mentioned, After Virtue, is to ask the question, are we capable of recovering through cultural memory that system because the alternative seems to be Nietzsche. So Aristotle or Nietzsche is a famous chapter in After Virtue. So Dante is a great exemplar of how that system once thought about the world. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Uh, Two quick comments. The One, thank you for giving us the Lowell piece. Its poetry helped me appreciate the fidelity to Dante's language that Pinsky was at, and that was
Yes,
very
that's right.
helpful.
That's right.
But it also helped me um, recognize what you were speaking to, the real freedom that Dante was exhibiting against this movement to, as I say, institutionalize and codify
Yep.
the gospel that had been going on for now centuries.
Yeah.
Um, then then I just, forgive me for looking at it in the current moment, but we are at a moment where we once again are facing nihilism as a response, and
Yeah.
we're openly questioning what how we judge virtue,
Yes.
how we we're asking all these questions of shame and so on, and it just it 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 underlines why we want to take a class like this, really, to understand what hell is. So,
Right. Right. It seems very relevant. Yep. Yep.
yeah.
Thanks. Um, I want to mention one little thing from the Italian, which once in a while I look at. The lines where Dante says to Brunetto, he's grateful because you taught me how man makes himself immortal. And if you look at the Italian there, it's come l'uomo s'eterna. And the thing I want to point out about Dante and the brilliance of Dante is that there is no Italian verb, eternarsi. Dante made up this word. And he does this throughout the poem. There will be moments when he needs a verb. And so, what's the process of making yourself famous and immortal? You eternarsi. You eternarsi. So, thank you for showing me how l'uomo s'eterna. So that's just one of the things about his incredible linguistic brilliance that when he needs to, he will create language. Yeah, Andrew?
I just wanted to mention at the very end, I thought the translation, the Pinsky translation, was particularly beautiful at the very end of this canto, where
Yeah,
he where suddenly um, Brunetto sees this group approaching that he doesn't want to have anything to do with,
yeah,
and then must leave in a hurry to catch up with the group, and it's just above 120, seeming to me, well, and he went off, seeming to me like one of those who run competing for the green cloth in the races upon Verona's field, and of them, like one who gains the victory, not one who loses. I just that brings tears to my eyes every.
yeah,
I just
yeah,
think that's a beautiful. He clearly, it's interesting. There's a love here between Dante and Brunetto that's kind of, well, again, it's a kind of universal love that doesn't really rely on the level of hell that we might be in. And it's interesting. I think the sodomites come back in purgatory anyway, so maybe they're
hmm
not as
hmm
bad
hmm
as 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 one might have thought. But anyway, that's just a beautiful piece. I'm sure it's even more beautiful in the Italian, which is, maybe you want to read that from Poi si rivulse.
Yeah. Poi si rivolse e parve di coloro che corrono a Verona il drappo verde per la campagna e parve di costoro quelle che vince, non colui che perde.
Very beautiful.
Yeah, the commentators, of course, rip up and blend every single syllable in the poem. And there are explanations as I recall, of what's going on there about running for the cloth in Verona that are not as, what shall we say, as emotional as the one that you're describing, Andrew, which I share, by the way. The first time you read through the poem, it's just incredible, you know. So when you discover it, and they turn it into something more prosaic, of course, because they're commentators. That's the way they work. But the emotional power, I think, stays the same, even if there is some explanation. Same with Francesca. Do we care what her real history was? No. And neither with Brunetto, because Brunetto, for many of us, touches our kind of mental emblem of what a great teacher was like. And so, that final touch of someone who is flawed and yet, in many ways is a victor is really a wonderful touch.
Isn't it the end of Francesca that he where he falls down dead,
He
where Dante
thinks
falls
that
down
away.
dead?
Thinks
So
that away.
we've come a long way from there, right? From
That's
falling
right.
down dead to celebrating this character. So
He's still hanging on. He's kind of rocky. He's still not, he's capable of being struck dumb as he was earlier, just not even able to speak. But he's getting somewhere. Um, Brunetto predicts a great future for him. Brunetto believes that Dante's life is going to resemble his own, which of course is not exactly the way it's going to go. But again, because Dante is a believer, Brunetto was not. And then I want to get to a question that Bob raised about Brunetto saying, you're going to have a hard time because some of these Florentines are the real thing. They're descendants from Romans. And then there's this other group we know about that came down from the hills above Florence, Fiesole.
Yes.
They have these Etruscan roots, and they're troublemakers. So this is kind of a legend, a popular legend about the mixing of peoples in Florence. I don't really know quite what to say about it other than the Etruscans are fascinating, and the Romans learned a lot from them. We don't know a lot about the Etruscans. But I will say, I once, a long time ago, lived in a little hill town called Montepulciano, tiny place, beautiful, a movie set. And around the city squares, there were some really, really old buildings. And in one of the buildings, a palazzo of some kind, maybe it was a city hall, I forget. One of the builders in the 18th century had embedded Etruscan funeral urns into the side of the building. So, which goes back to like early Roman times or before. They're basically a pre-Roman civilization, which I think the Romans essentially destroyed. But it was just incredible to me to be walking around in the square of a city that could trace physically in the objects on the walls as you went walking around on the way to get your cappuccino, pieces of this ancient civilization. Wow, So that kind of thing is all through the poem. And Brunetto has this kind of theory about why Dante is going to have political problems. I don't think that obviously that theory about the Etruscan element makes a whole lot of sense, but politically it probably was a problem. Yeah, Aren't?
Yeah, I mean, this just always brings me back to this context of like all time, kind of exploding outward toward the horizon, but also contracted, because
Uh-huh.
there's of course the reference to the statue of Mars, which according to the
Yeah.
notes, has now been lost forever. But I mean, this idea, and even with the old man, of Crete, I was reminded of. I think it was the statue of Zeus in Olympia in
Hmm.
Greece that,
Hmm.
that was there's a term for this, but it's a statue that's composed of many materials of gold and wood
Oh,
and metal, different metals.
oh, yeah. This is the colossal statue. Is
Yeah, the
that the one?
Colossus. Yeah, that
Yeah.
also was lost at some point. But the point is that these statues existed for a long time within historical record, and then at some point were lost. Like the statue of Mars eventually washed, in a flood down down the river, but was obviously still within, kind of oral tradition, recorded memory, at Dante's time. And so, Elias, to your point, like the proximity to which all of these time periods, which now we compartmentalize and categorize for the convenience of scholarship, were so much more kind of lived together.
That's
And
right.
so, in that sense, I mean, that is why, I mean, to me, one of the most just wonderful parts of this poem is this idea that, yeah, Homer is in a sense kind of being judged, along with all of these, Christians, but at the same time, it makes it very clear that, like, in the sense of which, this is Dante's context now, another.
Mhm.
I mean, time is fleeting in that sense. I mean, it could another world order could come around where now the Christians are being judged as the
Yes.
pagans were, as the ancients were, and
Yeah.
so in that sense, to be able to have this ability to kind of live in this this kind of like this temporal space that's just very mixed
Yeah.
and fluid is lovely.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a
story
sorry. Go ahead.
shapes time. Story shapes time.
Hmm.
It is a way of Dante tells this tremendous story as a way of shaping time, and
Huh. Huh.
it I find it quite moving in that way.
Mm-hmm. He is helping us form our memories
Yeah.
of these times, right?
Rand, I couldn't help but think of the current New Yorker cover, which is a profile sort of the Statue of Liberty, our great colossal sculpture with
Hmm.
7 bullets in its back, representing the murder of I forget his name, Petty, I think, right?
Yeah.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
Anyway,
No.
so the colossal sculpture that of our time is still in play culturally, um, very much. So anyway.
Very much. Yep. Yep. Yeah, well, and on that point, what else is going on here is that you can tell Dante is moving beyond a kind of a local vision, a municipal vision, to something bigger, kind of inch by inch. But as he's leaving behind Brunetto, he's moving toward something else. He's not there yet, but that's part of the process that's underway. All right. Well, we probably should hold off there. Thanks, everybody. That was great fun. Great to see you all again. Everybody, stay well and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you
Ciao,
so much.
tutti.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Ciao.